Can Canada continue to call itself a world leader in mining? That is my question for you as we navigate this show, taking a very close look at Victoria Gold's Eagle Gold Mine in Yukon and the response to this failure of the heap leach facility. Hello and welcome to the Northern Miner Podcast. My name is Adrian Pocobelli, enacting a free press and who has defended this industry going on 10 years, and now I am starting to second guess my own views. When you look up close at how this whole incident, failure, whatever you want to call it, is being handled, it could simply be a PR failure. And for those that don't know, to bring you up to date, and again, we're going to have Blair McBride, production editor of the Northern Miner. He actually managed to get video of before and after. It happened while he was on a Yukon investment tour. The Eagle Gold Mine in Yukon, as far as I understand, is the biggest gold mine in the Yukon, a major mine in the Yukon mining industry. So he actually, as part of that tour, got video from the air of the mine site, and then afterwards, as he was going to a different mine, managed to get video after the incident had occurred. I mean, incredible. So we're going to talk to Blair McBride to get all the information and all the details and really try and figure out what is going on here? You know, what should be a fairly simple story, one would think. There's a mining problem. Okay, there's cyanide with material that has gone over the wall of the heap leach facility and has created a landslide. That is my general understanding of what's happened here. And that has gone into a creek and that is contaminating the water. A fairly simple story, but what's odd about it, again, is how the company and the government are actually rolling out the information here. Like it's just small amounts of information. Just to give you a timeline. And again, I'm just looking at everything from the internet here. So there may be tons going on. They may be working, around the clock, doing incredible things, and they just may not be communicating them. It's totally possible. So I think that's important to keep in mind here. But the communications of a mining incident that could contaminate potentially drinking water, no matter how small the risk, because I'm sure some people are maybe listening to this and going, oh, don't overinflate the risk here. Don't cause panic. If there's a risk, there's a risk. Okay, groundwater is harder to test because it's underground. It's slower to seep through. So there are justified causes for concern here. Maybe it's not that bad, but again, do you want to live downstream and drink your water from somewhere that has elevated levels of cyanide? I mean, do you want that in your water? Like, put yourself in the shoes of the First Nation down the stream. You probably don't, right? Do you want your grandma drinking from that water? I don't think so. So here's the timeline, just to give you a quick overview. June 24th, the day of the incident, Victoria Gold releases a press release. Victoria Gold, Eagle Gold Mine heap leach pad incident. Victoria Gold announces this morning the heap leach pad, HLP, at the Eagle Gold Mine in Yukon experienced a failure. Operations are temporarily suspended while the site operations team, along with management, continue to assess the situation and gather information. So we're gathering information, we're assessing the situation. At this early stage, it can be confirmed that there has been some damage to infrastructure and a portion of the failure has left containment. There have been no injuries to personnel associated with the incident. The company will provide further information as it becomes available. Nothing really wrong with that. Basically, same day, they put out a press release saying something's happened here. Where I start to have issues, though, is they don't release another press release till July 4th. That's 10 days later. So there's a failure, material has left containment, no more information until July 4th. Now, the government was also, you could argue, quite slow. I can understand it not being the same day, but at least say June 25th, I would expect something not till June 26th. So 2 days later, we get a statement from Minister of Energy, Mines and Resources, John Stryker, on the heap leach failure at the Eagle Gold Mine. And here we get just slightly more information. Quote, the company moved quickly following the slide to build dams to hold back contaminated water. Again, why didn't the company announce this? Shouldn't the company be announcing everything that they're doing? Nothing. The water is being pumped into storage ponds. Natural resource officers are monitoring water on site, And the Department of Environment continues to operate long-term water quality monitoring stations upstream and downstream of the mine. Now, scrolling down a bit, based on the information currently available and based on the location of the incident, the drinking water supply wells for the village of Mayo are not impacted, and the drinking water in Mayo is safe to drink. I mean, that was done 2 days later. I mean, how do they know that after 2 days? Just out of curiosity. I mean, if there is contaminated water seeping through the ground, how do you know that in 2 days? I mean, maybe they do, but I'm just surprised they would know so quickly. Although we believe any potential risk is extremely low, out of an abundance of caution, Environmental Health Services will support the village of Mayo in ongoing coordination of drinking water analyses to monitor for contaminants of concern until more is understood about the details of the event. So we're going to continue testing it. What I thought they were going to say is we're going to provide, at least bottles of water, right? I mean, until this is known, here's a bunch of free water, bottles of water. We're going to send it over to you. Why aren't they doing that? No, we're going to continue to test. So what if the test is positive? Then it's like, sorry, the last 2 weeks you've been drinking contaminated water? Is that the strategy? I mean, it seems to me like there is a risk, but keep drinking the water and we'll keep testing in case it turns out the water is bad. I mean, that is the strategy. Continuing on. Our government has been communicating directly with the First Nation of Notcho-Nyakdun, the village of Mayo, Victoria Gold, and other stakeholders as we navigate this evolving situation together. We are dedicated to keeping Yukoners informed with accurate information and plan to have our departmental officials provide a technical briefing to the media by the end of the week with updates shared as they become available. Now, that is the last press release on the Yukon government's website on this issue. There have been no other press releases. So that was June 26. A full week later, the First Nation of Notcho-Nyakdun has had enough of not hearing anything. First, they put out a press release on Facebook. First Nation of Notcho-Nyakdun demands halt of all Yukon mining activity and an independent investigation and review of Victoria Gold Eagle Gold Mine failures. Land use planning is required by treaty, rigorous safety and regulatory processes urgently required to prevent repeated mining incidents. So what they want is speed. And if you look at everything that the company and the government is communicating, whether it's the slowness of the releases, as well as the press conference the next day that the Yukon government did, is it's going to take a lot of time and we're going to have to test over time and they haven't figured out a strategy on how to secure things. So you see the tension here. I mean, again, it's the tension of people, the company and the government who don't have to drink the water, and the community, which is going, you know what, we don't want another documentary made out of our community on how the government screwed up, right? Like, I mean, they're the ones that have to drink the water. Would you want to drink the water if there's a 1% chance or a 0.5% chance that it's contaminated? Maybe it's in low enough doses that it won't kill you, but what else does cyanide do to you? Do you end up with cancer 20 years later? I mean, again, do you want to drink that water? Maybe that would sharpen everybody's focus over there at the government and Victoria Gold. Like, you drink the water. Oh, it's just, there's not enough for it to be a problem. I don't want to drink cyanide in my water. I don't care how low it is. And I imagine that's how they feel. And here it is, 2 paragraphs down. The severity of contamination from cyanide and other chemicals has not been publicly conveyed. And they repeat, mining companies and the Yukon government must suspend industrial activity immediately. Now, the next day, July 4th, they have their press conference, and John Stryker, the Minister of Energy and Mines and Resources, basically takes an all-or-nothing approach. If you guys want us to shut down the mine, as if he hasn't even met with them. I mean, that's the impression it gives. If you shut down all mining activity, then we can't continue to deal with this, and we don't think that's what you want. That's the answer. Rather than going, hey, we totally understand. We're bringing you in. We're making you front and center here because we understand your concerns. We're stopping everything but the fix. We have heard you. Instead, it's being said, we don't think you want to do that. I mean, is that patronizing? It's their territory. At least that's what everybody says at the start of every conference. And then, again, it's this disconnect between words and reality. It's Shakespearean. The whole press conference, you get the sense of the government saying, hey, this is Victoria Gold's problem, not ours. We're here simply to monitor. No action. And you can't fix this from a desk, is what I kept saying. And we're going to have a meeting. And so they were going to have a meeting later on July 4th, where they're going to discuss potential solutions. Where's our press release? Where's the information? We don't have anything. Give us information here. Tell us what you're doing, because otherwise we assume you're doing nothing. And unfortunately, it gets worse. So July 4th, Victoria Gold puts out a press release. In that press release, they give a very short update. And to quote, as initially reported, there were no injuries to personnel associated with the incident. And Victoria's primary focus has been on the continued safety of its employees and mitigation of harm to the environment. The company has and will continue to liaise with the government of Yukon, the First Nation of Nacho-Nyaq-Dun, the Village of Mayo, the Yukon Workers' Safety and Compensation Board, and other regulatory authorities. With respect to environmental mitigation, the question at hand here. Within hours of the incident, a pumping system was established to return water from the heap leach facility material to lined containment ponds. Diversion systems have also been installed for the management of both non-contact and contact water and material. To date, continued environmental surface water quality sampling at multiple points downstream of the property has not detected any cyanide. So that is on July 4th, before the press conference. Then in the press conference, the Yukon government go on to say how much cyanide they found and how actually they found quite elevated levels. And we have a story from Naimul Karim, actually alumni here of the Northern Miner in the Financial Post, elevated cyanide levels found in creek after Yukon gold mine landslide. Yukon's Energy and Mines Minister John Stryker said in a press conference, referring to the July 4th press conference on Thursday, that a sample taken at the mine site indicated a cyanide presence of 8.58 milligrams per liter, which is a lot higher than the permitted level of 0.005 milligrams per liter or 5 parts per billion. So we're talking about 150 times what is allowed. Right at the bottom of the stream, 150 times. Okay, fine, it's contaminated. Okay, and then downstream, it sounds like it gets better. Just a couple of lines down, the sample collected from nearby Haggart Creek, which appears to be the main concern, indicated a cyanide presence of 0.04 milligrams per liter. That is still 8 times the permitted level. 8 times. And interestingly, John Stryker was asked in the press conference, like, what about this disparity? And he basically said, look, there's a lot of samples that need to be taken here. It's like COVID. Some results are going to be positive and some are not. And all that tells me is we don't know. And if you don't know how contaminated things are, you have to assume that they are, because you don't get a do-over of drinking contaminated drinking water. Do you want to take that risk? So I return to my opening question here. Can Canada continue to call itself a leader of the mining industry, with this being how mine failures are dealt with? Now, Blair McBride also released a story on July 4th. No cyanide risk to drinking water after Victoria Gold accident, Yukon government says. So reporting on the press conference, and we have Dr. Sudit Rainade, Yukon's chief medical officer of health, who said in the press conference, quote, "It's very reassuring that the water samples that have come back from the regulated drinking water system show no concern, and that is also backed by the watershed analysis that's been done by the Department of the Environment," end quote. However, Rainade said people should avoid recreational water use in the immediate vicinity of Haggart Creek near the mine as a precaution. And we have a quote from John Stryker as well. Quote, "This level of cyanide in Haggart Creek could potentially affect fish. Whether it will actually affect fish depends on other chemicals in the water. Water sampling is ongoing and fish toxicity testing is underway," end quote. Another thing about the press conference is they had an expert there, a geotechnical expert, and he was basically saying there's a pretty high risk that more landslides happen with more rain, like a serious risk. Again, they were supposed to be meeting later that afternoon to come up with a plan. 10 days after the initial press release, they're starting to discuss ways of securing the site. I mean, it's unbelievable from my perspective. I mean, one would think that is the immediate concern. How do we secure this thing? And even if it's impossible, even if the situation is so unstable that there's no way to get heavy machinery in, that there's no way of solving it, at least you should say that. We have no way of actually fixing this thing. But right now, we don't know. So the government detects cyanide, the company doesn't. There is also a disparity, interestingly, between the injuries. The Yukon government said in its briefing, this is Blair McBride, the Yukon government said in its briefing last Friday that one person was injured in the accident, with 2 people requiring first aid treatment, whereas the company said that nobody was injured. So what's the deal there? I mean, again, this should be a pretty simple story, yet we're getting all this divergent narratives. The company saying one thing, the government saying something else. No wonder the First Nation of Nacho Nyakdun is unhappy. And finally, the Yukon Star has a report from T.S. Gillick with the headline, Eagle Mine Slide Should Never Have Happened, expert says. So this comes out July 8th, which is yesterday. A retired expert in heap leach mining says the Eagle Mine landslide should never have happened, and he is blaming the Yukon government for it. John McLeod has more than 30 years of experience in the mining industry, in particular with operations such as Victoria Gold's Eagle Mine operation north of Mayo. On June 24th, the entire heap leach pad at the site collapsed, prompting a landslide that left more than a kilometer of debris in its wake, and creating fears that cyanide is now spreading into the groundwater table. McLeod spoke to the Yukon Star Friday afternoon about the situation. He cited a report done by a consulting company when the mine was first proposed. Quote, "It's all there. Right in the report are all the answers you need about the cause. It's pretty clear what happened." A consultant engineering company reviewed the whole heap leach facility and its operating procedure. They made quite a number of recommendations which were not followed. These recommendations were based on best practice for managing heap leach projects, which most reputable mining companies undertake as normal. What is interesting is that this engineering report was prepared for the Department of Energy, Mines and Resources, not Victoria Gold. The EMR should have then regulated and enforced the recommendations. I see no evidence that they ever did. End quote. He added, quote, "This might explain why the bureaucrats at last Friday's technical meeting had such shocked looks on their faces. They are attempting to avoid the headlights." End quote. Quote, "This project should have never gotten off the ground. On June 7th, 2017, then Premier and Finance Minister Sandy Silver reduced Victoria Gold's corporate taxes from 15% to 12%. I suppose the only silver lining is that Victoria Gold will go out of business, and the Eagle Project and Brewery Creek will no longer spoil our environment beyond all the damage they have already caused." And one more quote, and again, this is a retired expert in heap leach mining. Quote, "They were warned about the danger. They miscalculated the moisture content in the heap leach pad. The management and monitoring was unreliable from day one. This shouldn't have been allowed in this day and age." So that is your update on Victoria Gold. So we have a full in-depth interview with Blair McBride, production editor at the Northern Miner, later on in the show. And finally, just to catch up on everything else going on out there, we have a headline from the Financial Times: U.S. intervened in Congo mine sale to Chinese arms groups. So we're hearing recently about this copper mine that was going to be sold to a Chinese arms manufacturer, and the U.S. has intervened in the sale of it. So that is in the DRC. U.S. officials encouraged the Democratic Republic of Congo's state-owned miner Jeka Mines to review the sale, announced last week, of Trafigura-backed Chimaf Resources to Norin Mining, a subsidiary of China's state-owned defense company Norinco, the people said. And scrolling down a bit, Jeka Mines said in a statement on Monday that its board vetoed the deal after learning of it through the media. So the DRC continues to be a very hot spot with all of its copper there. And we have also an update on the war that's going on the eastern side of the Democratic Republic of Congo. According to a UN report, Rwandan soldiers are fighting alongside the M23 rebels in the DRC. So, of course, Rwanda has been accused of supporting the M23. Now, according to a report commissioned by the UN Security Council, Rwanda has substantial military involvement and influence in the conflict, and that they are ultimately being held responsible for the actions of the M23. And here's another quote. This is AFP on France24.com. Some 3,000 to 4,000 Rwandan soldiers are fighting alongside the M23 in East DR Congo, said a UN experts report seen by AFP on Monday, which noted that Kigali has de facto control of the rebels' operation. Of course, Kigali being the capital of Rwanda. There's also reports, one assumes the same one, that Uganda is also providing support to the M23 rebels in the eastern DRC. This is Reuters. The Ugandan army has provided support to the M23 rebel group operating in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, a United Nations report seen by Reuters on Monday said, as escalating clashes there fuel fears of a new all-out conflict. Uganda denied involvement, saying it is cooperating closely with Congolese government forces. And another headline here, this is also Agence France-Presse, DR Congo military court sentences 22 soldiers to death for fleeing the enemy during fighting with M23 rebels, a lawyer told AFP. I mean, what goes on in the back of my head are some of these weapons that are being sent around, have they found themselves with the M23? Because they are scoring victory after victory here, from what we can tell. And the United Nations also put out a press release. Military group's expansion in Democratic Republic of Congo, quote, carries very real risk of provoking wider regional conflict, end quote, mission head tells Security Council. So there is an increasing concern of war in the DRC. And finally, before we move on to our news stories, Niger nixes GovEx uranium mining license. And this is in the Northern Miner. Niger has revoked GovEx uranium's mining license after it failed to start the Maduela mine, one of the world's largest projects for the nuclear fuel, by the Wednesday deadline the ruling junta imposed months ago. They are going to challenge the decision. Also, there is a new mining code in Mali, so perhaps that is good for business. And finally, Hawaii bans seabed mining. Interestingly, another headline, China's deep-sea heavy-duty mining vehicle reaches record depths in sea trials. And finally, BYD is building a massive $1 billion EV plant in Turkey as global expansion accelerates. And we have more news stories coming up. So a wonderful show in store for us with a very interesting interview with Blair McBride, who's been following Victoria Gold's Eagle Gold Mine story very closely. So we get all the details from Blair and what it was like to be in the Yukon while this occurred. With that, if you want to find us online, you can find us at northernminer.com. You can find us on X at Northern Miner and on Instagram at The Northern Miner and on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, where we also host these podcasts and wherever podcasts are available, including Spotify, SoundCloud, and Apple Podcasts. And with that, let's turn to the news. And turning to the website, big move out of Canada. Canada puts its big miners off limits just as M&A is heating up. This is Bloomberg News via mining.com. Canada is making it harder for foreign firms to acquire its biggest mining companies, potentially taking some of the global industry's attractive takeover targets off the table. The Canadian government will only approve foreign takeovers of large Canadian mining companies involved in critical minerals production, quote, in the most exceptional of circumstances, end quote, according to the latest guidelines from Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne. The directive issued on Thursday is part of a sweeping effort by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government to protect Canada's critical minerals sector and national security's interests. And you see how governments are thinking about their mining companies. Like, it just seems unimaginable that South Africa would allow Anglo-American to be sold. Continuing on, the move appears to insulate domestic companies from takeovers when the world's biggest mining firms are hunting for metals that underpin the global transition away from fossil fuels. Industry giants such as Glencore, BHP, and Rio Tinto have been seeking to boost exposure to metals like copper as the appetite for large transformative deals return across the industry. And you really do get the sense that maybe this was about tech. Canadian mining firms in turn have become appealing targets. Teck Resources spent much of the year fending off Glencore's $23 billion takeover attempt before the Swiss company opted instead to just buy the company's steelmaking coal business. The federal government approved the $6.9 billion deal on Thursday, while also setting new criteria for future foreign mining deals. And we have a quote from Champagne. Quote, this high bar is reflective of the strategic importance of Canada's critical minerals sector and how important it is that we take decisive action to protect it, end quote. The government's list of 34 critical minerals includes copper, zinc, potash, and uranium. The Mining Association of Canada declined to comment on the new directive, interestingly. And we also have a quote from Pierre Lassonde, who said, quote, essentially, they are saying to Glencore, don't bother coming back for the other half of Teck. It looks to me like Ottawa is prepared to ring-fence the Canadian critical metals industry with this new directive, end quote. And a follow-up story here, also Bloomberg News via mining.com. Canada's move to limit mining M&A hurts big metals producers, Scotia says. New Canadian rules limiting foreign takeovers of mining companies will leave the nation's biggest metals producers with lower valuations than their global peers, according to Bank of Nova Scotia mining analysts. Canada will only approve foreign takeovers of large domestic mining firms with significant critical minerals operations, quote, in the most exceptional of circumstances, end quote, according to guidance issued Thursday by Industry Minister Françoise-Philippe Champagne. And here's the quote from Scotiabank analysts Orest Waukada and Eric Windmill, who said on Monday, the directive, quote, significantly compresses M&A optionality and potentially restricts financing options for Canadian miners. As a result, we now anticipate most Canadian miners to trade at lower valuation multiples versus global peers, end quote. The new directive suggests that large Canadian headquartered companies, including Cameco, Teck Resources, Ivanhoe Mines, and Lundin Mining, quote, are now off limits to potential foreign buyers, end quote. Other companies named were First Quantum Minerals, Hudbay Minerals, Capstone Copper, and Ero Copper. So, as we've been saying out here, free trade is feeling dead as a doornail these days, isn't it? And finally, we have one more quote here from the report. Quote, this is clearly designed to prevent the same fate experienced by the last generation of large Canadian miners, namely Alcan, Falconbridge Noranda, and Inco, end quote. Continuing on, U.S. miners push Washington to revive long-dormant Bureau of Mines. This is Reuters via mining.com. Mining trade groups plan to push Washington to revive and expand the long-dormant Bureau of Mines, an effort aimed at streamlining how the U.S. government regulates and supports critical minerals production and timed to coincide with the 2024 presidential election. The lobbying campaign, details of which have not been previously reported, is set to launch this month ahead of the Republican and Democratic political conventions. It will contrast scattered U.S. mining oversight with Australia and other countries where senior mining-related agencies report directly to the heads of government, according to three sources with direct knowledge of the effort. And we have a quote from Rich Nolan, head of the National Mining Association Trade Group, which is spearheading the push. Quote, mining decisions right now are spread across multiple government agencies, and that makes transparency and accountability very difficult, end quote. Very interesting there. Continuing on, Indonesia says U.S. must invest as critical minerals race picks up. It's Bloomberg News via mining.com. Developed nations such as the U.S. need to invest in countries with vast reserves of critical minerals to reduce supply chain risks, as these commodities are, quote, the new oil, end quote, driving geopolitics, according to Indonesia's Deputy Foreign Minister Pahala Mansuri. Advanced countries need to see where the geoeconomics are shifting and adjust their priorities as the world is already transitioning into renewable energy, Mansuri said in an interview with Bloomberg News last week. This could help build better economic ties with Indonesia, the biggest producer of nickel, a metal that's used for electric vehicle batteries, he said. There is, quote, recognition from the U.S. that renewable energy is actually a very strategic industry, end quote, Mansuri said. Quote, critical minerals are like the oil of the past, or they are actually the oil of the future, end quote. And continuing on, nickel price to see steady rise on EV demand after a flat 2024. According to Fitch, this is by mining.com staff, nickel prices won't recover this year, but neither will they tank, according to a new report by BMI, a unit of Fitch Solutions. Despite the current pressure on nickel prices, Fitch expects upside risks, including potential supply disruptions and a weakening of the U.S. dollar later in the year, to place a floor under prices through 2024. After that, the research and data firm sees a steady rise in prices to 2028, backed by EV battery demand. I mean, what a change we've had here from January when everybody was saying it's all over in the nickel industry. Now, it's starting to look bullish. Continuing on, this is the headline of the Northern Miner, Indonesia Group to buy Hillside Copper Project in Australia for $361 million. This is by Henry Lazenby. Rex Minerals, which holds Australia's largest permitted and shovel-ready copper project, is being bought out by Indonesia-based MCH Metals Australia for $361 million. The Rex board unanimously recommends shareholders vote for the deal. Quote, the transaction provides certainty of value as well as opportunity for REX shareholders to realize their investment at a 10-year historical share price high, end quote, REX Chief Executive Officer Richard Laufman said in a statement. Continuing on, panic short covering ignites COMEX copper as shipments fail to arrive. I mean, we are bursting with news here. This is Reuters via mining.com. COMEX copper futures surged on Friday as some players bought back bearish or short positions to reduce their exposure due to expected shipments of copper failing to arrive in the United States, traders and analysts said. A frenzied rally based on speculative buying sent copper futures on both COMEX and the London Metal Exchange to record peaks in May, partly due to a short squeeze on COMEX. Since then, copper prices have slid, partly due to expectations that shipments of material would arrive in the United States, allowing the cover of exposed short positions. So that never showed up. Quote, some participants cannot stomach the volatility, and there is certainly some panic covering to avoid the moves we saw last time around, a trader said. Quote, but if anything, the situation could potentially be more volatile due to the lack of usual participants, end quote. The COMEX buying has led to a widespread or arbitrage between prices on the two exchanges, with the COMEX premium doubling to more than $300 a metric ton over the past 2 days. August futures on COMEX on Friday climbed to a 5-week high of $4.69 a pound, or $10,354 a metric ton, and this compares to an intraday peak of LME 3-month copper of $10,000. So over $300 disparity there. And here is the money quote that is buried at the bottom of this article. Quote, inventory that was supposed to come to the U.S. clearly hasn't arrived, end quote, said Dan Smith, head of research at Amalgamated Metal Trading. It was unclear what was causing the delay in shipments to the United States. The lack of shipments is evident in copper inventories and CME warehouses, which have tumbled 71% since late March, to just about 9,000 tons, the lowest since 2008. Smith added, quote, people have already been burned on this once, so they're much more cautious now, but we're all a bit nervous it's going to blow out again, end quote. So copper shipments not arriving in the U.S. How wild is that? Another headline, copper to retest $10,000 a ton, according to Citi and BMO. This by a staff writer at the Northern Miner. Another headline, China's Shandong province plans $14 billion lithium battery industry by 2025. This is Reuters via mining.com, and this is classic. With the lithium market in disrepair, what is it at now? $12.58 a kilogram. What does China do? They don't close down. They open a $14 billion lithium battery factory. China's Shandong province plans to develop a $14 billion lithium battery industry by next year. A local government notice showed on Monday. Shandong, in China's east, aims to build an industrial chain covering electrode materials, electrolytes, battery cells, and assembly, the notice showed. The plan includes expanding the category of consumer batteries, improving quality and performance, and strengthening research and development. And here's another very interesting point, because you hear about government subsidies of the supply chain in China. The provincial government will support the cities of Jinan and Qingdao to develop companies engaged in raw material production and battery assembly based on the needs of regional new energy vehicle makers. It will also support cities such as Zhaozhuang and Jining in lithium battery manufacturing and energy storage projects. And finally, just a couple of headlines here. BASF pulls plug on Chile investment plans amid EV slowdown. So more pulling of plans here, this time BASF in Chile with lithium, very interestingly. Finally, a headline from the Northern Miner. Rio Tinto puts $17 million into graphite developer Sovereign. So Rio Tinto getting into graphite. Those are your news stories. Now, let's take a look at metal prices. And turning to metal prices, let's take a quick look at the bond market. For context, the U.S. 10-year bond is yielding 4.29%. That is 0.16% lower Then last week, the UK 10-year gilt is at 4.14%. That is 0.12% lower than last week. And Italy 10-year bond is at 3.9%. That is 0.22% lower than last week. So after a jump last week, 10-year bond yields moving lower. Turning to precious metals, gold is trading at $2,367.90 per ounce. That is $27 higher than last week. Silver is at $31.27 per ounce. That is $1.58 higher than last week. So big jump in silver. Platinum is trading at $1,040 per ounce. That is $23 higher than last week. And palladium almost at par with platinum, trading at $1,004 even. That is $40 higher than last week. Turning to industrial metals, copper is trading at $4.61 per pound. That is 20 cents higher than last week. Iron ore is trading at $111.31. That is $5 higher than last week. Aluminum is also higher at $1.15 per pound. That is a penny higher than last week. Lead is also higher at $1.02 per pound. That is a penny higher than last week. Nickel is unchanged at $7.91 per pound. Tin is trading at $15.37 per pound. That is 52 cents higher than last week. Cobalt is unchanged at $12.32 per pound. Lithium is unchanged at $12.59 per kilogram. Uranium is just slightly lower at $85.65 per pound. That is 10 cents lower than last week. And zinc is slightly higher at $1.34 per pound. That is a penny higher than last week. So metals edging sideways to slightly higher, with silver being the standout, and also palladium and platinum almost at par again. And those are your metal prices. Coming up, I'm very pleased to welcome to the podcast Blair McBride, production editor at the Northern Miner. And Blair tells the amazing story of how he went to an investor conference in Yukon for the Northern Miner and managed to get aerial video of Victoria Gold's Eagle Mine, which we were discussing at the beginning of this podcast before the landslide, and then managed to get aerial video after the landslide. So incredible work from Blair. Great reporting too, and he gives his take on what is happening in Yukon. I hope you enjoy the conversation, and I will see you on the other side. Join us today. I'm very pleased to welcome back to the Northern Miner podcast, Blair McBride, production editor at the Northern Miner. Blair, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's really great to have you, Blair. I mean, what a story that is developing with Victoria Gold in the Yukon. So you were recently visiting there. You've been reporting on the story. For those that aren't aware of this story, which happened last week, what happened?
Okay, so the Eagle Mine is about 400 kilometers north of Whitehorse in west central Yukon. I was there as part of an Invest Yukon site visit. This included visiting some exploration sites and Eagle, which is Victoria Gold's producing gold mine. It's actually the territory's only producing gold mine. We were there on Saturday, so we did the typical site tour. We saw the open pit. We drove around the open pit, and then we had a safety briefing. We had a presentation from the company, from the management. Then we had lunch and we left. Everything seemed fine. I'm not an engineer by any means, but everything seemed fine. 2 days later, there was a conference in Dawson City, and we were informed that the Victoria Gold representative wouldn't be there. So this conference involved presentations and one-on-one meetings with the companies for investors. The one-on-one meetings are for investors mainly, and also for journalists like me. So yeah, we were informed that Victoria Gold wouldn't be there. I didn't really think much of it. And then they had a news release shortly afterwards saying that there was an accident at the heap leach pad, and then things unfolded from there basically.
How wild is that? So this was actually a total coincidence. I mean, you're out there really to learn about the mine, big kind of in a sense, Yukon promotional tour of what they're doing in the mining industry. And sure enough, while you're there, and what took place, actually, to clarify, like there was a landslide of a certain kind. It involved a heap leach pad. Like, what did they announce? Just so people are aware of what we're talking about, like what happened there?
So basically, it's an open pit mine, but it also has a heap leach pad, a very big heap leach pad. I mean, these things are always big. So the way that it works is after they mine the ore, it's crushed and then it's stacked on the heap leach pad, which is an enormous area. And then there's a solution of water and cyanide that's applied to the crushed ore, which separates the gold from the ore. And what happened was that there was an accident with the heap leach pad. Part of it spilled out of the containment and caused a landslide that ran down the edge of the heap leach pad and caused some infrastructure damage that hasn't been specified yet. And that was basically it.
So, in a sense, like it's still not clear then, is that right, what the cause of the landslide was?
That's correct. It's not known. The company and the Yukon government neither have said the exact cause is known yet.
Interesting. Now, what's also interesting about this story is they had an issue just recently, didn't they, in January, where they were fined something, menial sum of like $460. Was that related? Was it a similar type of thing? Like my impression from what I was reading was it wasn't that dissimilar of a story, so to speak.
Yeah, they had an incident in January, but they also had one back in March 2021 that caused a 17,000 liter spill of concentrate. But it seems like at the time that this was cleared up, it didn't worsen. Yeah, I believe there was a landslide in January that happened with, well, it was smaller from what I read, and it involved ore that wasn't going to be leached. So it didn't become the same scale of accident as this one. And it also wasn't clear how close that incident in January was to the accident that happened last week.
Fascinating. So there is this event that occurs during the investment conference. Now, you said a press release was published. Like, what does that mean? Like, did you kind of find out like while the rest of the world found out, or was it kind of announced at the conference? I imagine once the word got out on this thing, it probably spread like wildfire. Like, tell us a little bit about how you discovered the story and kind of what the impression was and the reaction at this conference.
So at first, they had a news release on the same day about a purchase agreement selling its Clear Creek property to Sitka Gold. So my first impression was a company representative couldn't attend because they were busy dealing with that. That was my first impression. That release obviously came out before the release about the accident. So there was no announcement when we were told that the representative wouldn't be at the conference. We just learned about it from the news release on the website. And I don't think anyone knew about the scale of it yet. Because, I mean, these things happen in the mining world. So we were just taking things as they came.
Okay, interesting. So, in a sense, the conference wrapped up before really the magnitude of the situation, the significance of the situation really was felt.
Yeah, like, I mean, some people might have been mumbling about this, but I was pretty busy with the conference, with the one-on-one meetings and with the keynotes and just getting everything organized and taking everything in. So, yeah, I don't think, for my perception, I don't think people were very alarmed about this.
Right. Okay, good. Just to set the stage of what it was like there and, was it chaos? Sounds like it wasn't really understood at that point. Maybe some mumblings, like you say.
I don't think that there was alarm at the conference about the incident. However, like it was obvious that this was newsworthy. So I did write up a story that day based on the news release. So like when we visited the mine 2 days previously, like obviously I took video and some photos of it, including a photo and video from the air of the plane before we landed near the mine. So I wrote up my story and I added some of those photos that I took. I knew that there was something happening here, but I didn't yet know the magnitude of it.
Interesting. Okay. And so tell us about that video then. Like, I mean, I was amazed at how all of a sudden you had aerial video of this mine. So had the accident happened in the video that we saw?
Okay, so there's two different timelines here. So the media that I used with my initial story, that was taken before the accident. And yeah, obviously that wouldn't show any accident because it hadn't happened yet. 2 days after the conference, when we were flying to a different site as part of the visit, we flew past the mine. And that's when I took photos and video of the actual accident, which turned out to be of decent quality. So funnily enough, I still had mobile data signal, even though we were probably like 600 meters up in the air. So I actually shot that video and sent it to Colin McClelland here in Toronto. Fortunately, the signal kept up for probably like another 10 minutes and then it died up in the air. But it was holding long enough that I could send that to him. And he added the video and the photo to the story. And the video, as you can see on the site, it shows some of the damage of the accident there in the landslide.
Indeed. I mean, the amount of coincidences here at work and the fact that you even have the before and after video. I mean, that's probably even useful for the investigators, I imagine, who are trying to figure out what happened here.
Yeah, it's pretty dramatic for sure, yeah.
It's kind of like a reporter's dream here, but of course there were some pretty real world consequences here. We have a mine disaster here, right? So there's a few implications that could be quite serious, that are quite serious. I mean, there was a report of injuries, and then there's a concern which is ongoing of the water quality. Has the cyanide that is used in the processing of this ore, there's reports that the cyanide amount in the water in the streams nearby are increasing. So what happened from the human point of view here?
So the solution that's in the heap leach pad includes cyanide. So when this accident happened and the landslide happened, obviously some of the solution that was in that escaped into the environment and into the water bodies nearby. And as you saw from my story, Yukon government officials sampled that water and sent it off to a lab in Burnaby, BC for final results because they don't have those facilities in the Yukon. The cyanide levels at the mine site or closest to the landslide at the mine, those are very high. I believe it was 8.58 milligrams per liter. But further downstream, it's much lower. It's less than 1 milligram per liter. And then also the First Nation of Nacho and Nyakdan has done their own testing. I don't believe that their results have been released yet. And then the chief medical officer of health also said in the news conference yesterday that the drinking water, according to downstream testing, is safe according to the latest reports. And that's the most recent information we have on the cyanide leakage.
Yeah, it must be really, I guess, nerve-wracking for the people that live around there because, of course, like, I mean, who knows how much time this takes to leak into the environment or into the groundwater, which I assume is kind of further underground. How do you measure these things? So all very interesting. And there were reports of injuries as well. Like, do you have any information that there may have been a couple of injuries? Do you have any information on that?
So the news conference they had last week, Yukon government officials said that there was one non-serious injury at the site and then 2 individuals received first aid. However, when Victoria Gold put out their news release yesterday, and this is only their second news release since the accident, they didn't mention, they said there were no injuries. And then also yesterday in the news conference, the Yukon government didn't mention that at all. So I sent them a follow-up email asking for clarification on that, and I'm still waiting for a response. So I'm not sure what the situation is with that.
Very interesting. And how has the communication been? You know, you don't want to be too hard on people because nobody plans to have this happen. But when it does happen, it's important for good communications. Like, do you feel like the company is doing what it needs to do in terms of communications? Could it be doing better? Like, how do you feel about the PR aspect of this as they manage this situation?
Well, I mean, since I've joined the Northern Miner, I haven't covered very many accidents. So I don't know what standard is in the industry is in terms of how often or how much companies should be updating on such a situation. But I imagine considering how serious this is for them, their share price plunged by more than 83%, I think, in 1 week. So I would say they could be providing more information, but I imagine they're also quite busy with other things right now, dealing with the fallout of this. In terms of the Yukon government, I think they've done a decent job. I think that the news briefing they had yesterday provided a lot more information that wasn't yet known last week because the water samples were in transit to the lab in BC. There wasn't a lot of information they had yet. So I don't really know. Yeah, like you said, it's easy to be hard on people in these situations. I would like it if there's more information, but with a complicated situation like this, with so many different people involved and different levels of authority, sometimes it's hard to get this information up quickly, right?
Right. As you mentioned, it sounds like the company defaulted on its debt. I mean, this story has many different branches to it. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Have they defaulted? Are they bankrupt? Again, it's like we're starved for information a little bit here. What do you know about that side of things?
Victoria Gold did say in the news release yesterday that they received notices of default from their lenders under a credit agreement from almost 4 years ago, although they didn't provide any more detail. The company's first quarter financial report this year says that its current debt payments total $232.5 million as of March 31. So I'm not a financial expert. I don't imagine this incident has helped their balance sheet at all. That's really all I can say about this. I wish I could say more. That's all I do now.
All you know is all you know. So all good,
Yeah.
Blair. Just to see if you have any more color on that. Now, what do you know then about how they are managing this? I saw something about storage pools, or almost as if they're creating these side dams. What are they doing to prevent any more damage being done to the environment?
Yeah, so they've built these containment dams to contain the potentially cyanide contaminated water that came off from the accident. And then yesterday in the news conference with the Yukon government, the geotechnical engineer gave a somewhat, I don't know, I guess you could say pessimistic view on this, that the slide pile is unstable. It's not currently possible to get heavy machinery up there to stabilize it. And he's also worried about rainy weather in the summer, leaving open the possibility of moving the slide further. Although he said it doesn't necessarily mean a landslide. It just means that this increased pressure from more water could cause the spill to, I guess, spill further down the ravine there. So I guess we'll have to see what happens with that.
Right. And didn't the First Nation of Nechonyak Dun, or FNNND, didn't they put out a Facebook post? Like they weren't happy with the reaction from the company or the government. Like it seems to me that they feel like not enough is being done right now to go fix the situation rather than worrying about the rain. Like just go and fix this. Like what is your sense of the First Nations perspective?
Yeah, they don't seem very happy about this at all. They actually, in a news release yesterday or the day before, they called for a total halt to mining activity in its traditional territory, and the Eagle Mine sits on its traditional territory. And they also called for an independent review of the situation. So yesterday in the news conference, the Minister of Mines was asked about this, if the government would commit to a total halt on mining activity in the First Nations territory. And I believe his name is John Stryker. He didn't really give a very clear answer. He said that the question about halting all mining is a big issue, a big question to take on. He would consider it. But he said that in the meantime, he doesn't think that the First Nation wants to end its cooperation with the government and the company on securing the environment at the mine site.
I really do get the sense, like, I mean, from over here, and I'm just someone over the internet here trying to understand this story. But from over here, frankly, it seems like the company is not really communicating super well. Let's put it that way. It seems the government, here the First Nation says, we want to halt to all mining activity. And the government says, we don't think you want to halt to all mining activity. I mean, it seems like people need a espresso or something. It seems very slow moving. I mean, what is the premier saying? Is there any accountability here, Blair?
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer. I would say it's too early to talk about accountability. The premier, Ranj Pillai, I don't believe he said anything yet about this. He was actually at the Invest Yukon site tour that I was at, although he was around before we went to the Eagle Mine site. We didn't see him after that. Yeah, accountability is a tough question to answer now. There just might be too much going on now, and I think accountability might come a bit further down as the weeks pass and the months pass.
I guess, but I mean, even if the premier is on vacation, I mean, it wouldn't be crazy at this time of year. At least put out a press release. We are on it. We're sending our emergency XYZ over to deal with this so that if the rain comes, we're not, there's just no sense of urgency here. Just from what I gather here, maybe there's total urgency and I'm not aware of it, but I just don't hear any sense of urgency. And no wonder the First Nation is saying, what's the deal? Does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah, it resonates. I mean, John Stryker, the Minister of Energy, Mines and Resources, whom I mentioned earlier, he has put out a statement and he was at the news conference yesterday. So I guess he's the communications lead for this in terms of the Yukon government's responsibility. But the premier, to my knowledge, hasn't said anything yet. Yeah, I don't know. Anything I would say here would just be speculation. Maybe the situation is much worse and they're just trying to slowly let out information. Maybe they're overwhelmed and they're doing the best they can. I really don't know.
Because it is significant, just from my perspective. Here you are following the story, and it seems like a simple story to a certain degree. Landslide happens. Is there contamination? What's going on to fix the situation? And it seems very slow moving here. The fact that you don't know, right? And here you are trying to get more information from the press conference and everything. And it's the fact that there's no obvious, like, okay, they're sending this plane over. There's going to be 10 trucks coming over. It's kind of lacking on specifics, the communications that are coming out here, which is quite interesting. Now, putting this in context, like how important is the Eagle mine within the context of Yukon mining? Like, it sounds to me like it's the biggest gold mine. Like, is it the biggest mine? Where does it fit in from your understanding within the Yukon mining industry?
Yeah, so I believe it's one of two producing mines in the territory. The other is Hecla Mining's Keno Silver Mine. So it's pretty important in the Yukon mining context and for the Yukon economy. It employs at least 500 people. Yeah, it's a major producing gold mine. So it's pretty darn important. Yeah, as you know, the Yukon has had major gold heritage history with the Yukon Gold Rush. There's plenty of gold exploration around the territory. Eagle is the only producing mine for now. So yeah, this is pretty important in the context of Yukon mining, but also an interesting issue that Northern Miner Editor-in-Chief Alicia Hyatt raised yesterday is that with the sentiment coming out from First Nations in the Yukon now and just their frustration and anger over the situation, it doesn't put in a very good light cooperation between First Nations and industry when it comes to mining. There's also the White River First Nation, which is located just east of the border with Alaska and Yukon. And they put out a release last week expressing high frustration with the situation. So it's possibly as bad for the industry as it is for industry-indigenous relations in the Yukon, which is I believe it's an issue that a lot of mining companies have worked hard to put front and center in recent years.
I mean, it borders on outrageous, actually, because all we hear is how these companies are doing everything they can to work with the community and all this. And then something real actually happens. And it's like, what, is everybody on vacation? Like, I mean, it kind of feels like the premier is missing in action. The company is kind of short on details, kind of vague. And here we are, people like you and me have to go show up on a microphone and talk about the industry and say, oh no, this industry is actually doing well. It's, leading the charge on, fostering good relations with First Nations. It feels like an empty promise when I hear this story.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't look good for anyone, especially the mining company and much of the government response so far.
Hopefully this podcast can help alleviate that situation. So just as we wrap up here, Blair, and thank you for your time. I know you're busy tracking this story. Where are things at right now, today? Like, where is this story? Or is there even a focus at this point? Is it sort of like, oh, well, we're waiting to see for the next press conference for some generalities to be spoken here?
Well, I think the most important upcoming steps are the water testing for cyanide. The government said the testing will be ongoing, including for fish toxicity. However, I spoke with a metallurgy expert yesterday for my story, Robert Raponi, and his perspective on this, from what I can see, really went a long way to lower the alarm on this. He said that cyanide, first of all, the concentration of cyanide on heap leach pads is quite low. And when this chemical is exposed to sunlight or makes contact with warmth, it dissipates even faster. So he told me that much of the risk is already passed. And the nature of cyanide being what it either kills you or it doesn't. The issue, however, with groundwater is different because obviously that's not exposed to warmth or to sunlight and it moves much slower. So I guess that means the time it would take for the cyanide to dissipate from that, it would take longer. But more testing is needed before we know if the groundwater has been contaminated with cyanide. So based on what he told me, it's possible that the cyanide risk, the worst of it, is passed already. And also, I think in my view, what the geotechnical engineer said yesterday in terms of the instability of the heap leach at the mine, even though the risk of landslide is lower now, that could still move, possibly posing more environmental hazards. So from my perspective, that's the next step. I mean, we don't really know yet about layoffs. I believe that the government said yesterday that all personnel except for 60 essential workers at the Eagle site have been sent home. So I'd like to know about the status of the workers there. Like, have they been laid off permanently, temporarily? I don't know. And then there's also the relations with the First Nations. Even if the cyanide risk is gone, they're obviously very unhappy with the accident and with the communication from the company. So the state of those relations is precarious for now, and it could take some time to repair that. So that's how I see things for now.
Indeed. Like, it seems to me that at the very minimum, if there's a concern that, say, rain is going to make this worse or that the landslide is still unstable, I mean, it just seems to me, why isn't Caterpillar equipment being flown over there or sent over there or from neighboring mines? It feels like it's just another disaster waiting to happen for these people that live nearby, and everybody else is sort of like, oh, we don't live near here, so it's not our problem. So, I'm going to continue my vacation is kind of the impression it's giving. Like, why aren't they cleaning this up as far as this landslide, securing it, putting out press releases saying we are securing this. This is what we're doing to make sure that if it rains a lot, we're going to minimize as much as possible. Like, am I completely out to lunch here?
No, that's a fair assessment. I mean, this could be the company's chance to come out and do and say all those things you just said. But from what we've seen so far, they aren't doing that. In the news conference yesterday, the government said a few times that the Eagle Mine, it's the responsibility of Victoria Gold. It's their responsibility to clean this up, even though the government will help where it can. So yeah, like you said, this would be a good opportunity for them to get out in front of it and say, like, we're sending this equipment and doing this and this. But even if they are doing that, I don't think they've exactly said it. I mean, aside from the containment dams, they have said that they're working on that. But yeah, in terms of like you mentioned, the heavy machinery and securing the landslide, I don't believe they've mentioned that yet.
I mean, for the government just to say, well, this is all Victoria Gold's issue. I mean, Victoria Gold has no money. They can't pay their debts. I mean, where are they going to get the money, right? And I don't like to use these words casually, but it seems like a complete failure in leadership from the government here. Do you have any final thoughts on this as we wrap up?
I mean, obviously, this was quite unexpected. I've been on a few site visits since I joined the Northern Miner, and this is probably the most dramatic thing that's happened so far, to put it mildly. So it's a huge situation that I'm just trying to take in as it comes. Yeah, and I just hope that there's a fair resolution to this and that the environmental aspect is cleaned up as soon as possible. And I'll just keep following it and see how things go.
Excellent. Well, you've been doing a fabulous job there, Blair. Keep it up. I mean, you should be sending this for awards later on for the incredible video and reporting you've been doing. So thank you for getting us the story as best you can. And come by and join us again sometime soon. So thank you for sharing this incredible story with us here today.
Yeah, well, thank you for those compliments. I appreciate it.
Blair McBride, production editor at the Northern Miner. Thank you for joining us on this week's podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks once again to Blair McBride for appearing on this week's podcast. And thank you, dear listener, for tuning in. Once again, if you want to help out the podcast, please leave us a review in the Apple Podcast directory. Share it with your friends. And until next week, take care.